Welcome to my final project for ETEC 521-66A. My name is Johnny Wu, and my project's title is The Role of Social Media in Strengthening Indigenous Cultural Identity, Preservation, and Education. So the reason why I chose the video project over writing a paper is that I wanted to explore the content of online social media using a video platform. So the main question that I will be answering in this project is, how do we define the role of specific social media tools in the process of decolonization? So one of the themes of this course was to understand decolonization as restoring indigenous worldviews, culture, and traditional ways of learning, and how technology influences that. And as an educator, I've always been quite interested in the role of social media and its affordances in education. So I really wanted to combine these two topics together in this project. The short answer to the question I found is that social media must tread a very fine line in order to be a viable source of information in that process of decolonization, because indigenous traditional knowledge is meant to be a face-to-face interaction passed down through generations. The over-reliance of technology is counterproductive to that. However, we will be exploring in this project the productive ways that it can help in that process of decolonization. So before discussing modern social media tools, I wanted to talk about past Indigenous perspectives towards media and technology to understand the context of where it's going. So I want to bring you to the discussion by Zimmerman and company and how they established an overly protectionist stance as they discussed how technology and online education was geared towards maintaining strong ethnic boundaries. They discussed the notion of wannabes being an insulting infringement of culture as they use a hodgepodge of stereotypes with practices taken out of context, usually in a disrespectful way. We saw this in Nanook of the North. We also learned in this course, as Ginsberg pointed out, that indigenous peoples used screen media not to mask, but to recuperate their own collective stories and histories. This led to the Red Power movement, as indigenous actors recognized how the visual performance of primitivism on screen served as a means of biological and cultural survival. I wanted to bring up the context of the Red Power movement because in 2019, in our digital-laden world, the paradox of primitivism has evolved into modern-day creations of similar self-fashioning representations, but now as digital content that's spread on social media through cyberspace. It is mainly done through Web 2.0 tools that are free, interactive, and easy to use digital platforms that ideally anybody can access. Now, in this project, I want to focus mostly on the platform Twitter, as it is a microblogging website, which has the purpose of quick and easy sharing of information. I wanted to start off by discussing how culturally neutral a platform like Twitter is. Is using Twitter simply reinforcing Western ideas of dependency on technology, consumerism, as well as a focus on individualism? What we learned in the Bowers reading is that the internet is a very deceptive and seductive technology as well. Sitting in front of such media becomes the ultimate source of authority instead of learning in a face-to-face traditional way. We also learned in the How reading that tribalism has to be a lived experience through a full sensory experience, which cannot be provided by technology. And our media only fulfills that audio-visual part of the experience, and an indigenous identity is tied to the land. So this goes back to my point earlier that it's a very fine line in defining the role of social media. I bring it back again to the How reading, where he says that the purpose of the user determines whether it is a constructive or destructive force. And I think that's where we can find a sense of cultural neutrality if we find a sense of neutrality through the user in that they still remember that the main source of Indigenous identity is done through a face-to-face interaction and learning traditional local knowledge. However, social media platforms do have a role in all of this because of the usefulness of their functions. Here we have a quote from the director of the Union BC Indians Chiefs, Don Bain, and he's talking about the direct user to audience functions of social media allows for a direct communication of information that is unfiltered through the industry or media, and it can be tailored content for audiences, so that Indigenous people or anybody visiting websites, coming on Facebook pages or Twitter feeds that are doing research for assignments or just wanting to learn information can have material that's directly provided. So in the context of Twitter being a platform of direct user to audience interaction, it goes hand in hand with Faye Ginsburg's assertion that social action and transformation in Indigenous communities has been linked to the control of media, representation, and access to technology. So that leads me to talk about the first idea of defining Twitter in terms of cultural preservation, which is that there's a link between social media use and community resiliency. I think that the Prince reading really brought this idea of social media use and community resilience to life, as the idea of remote, isolated Indigenous communities were able to unite through common causes and confront dominating politics to transform global landscapes. So what you're seeing here is Global TV's direct example as different Indigenous communities protested against the occupation of their lands and protecting resources using the hashtag #IdleNoMore.
Track across Canada, the reach seems wide. Self-determination or self-termination, writes one. This is our time. We must stand together, retweets another.
I heard last night that it was trending.
Behind the concept of idle no more, women learning new respect for social media's capacity to engage.
I think what makes this different is that it spans across all communities, all demographics, all across Canada and internationally.
The faces and now the images of the movement, created by a young man who says he never considered himself political until he saw the idle no more conversations online. The feather, the fist, the smartphone. Seems he's on to something, getting requests from Indigenous communities globally.
Brazil, Puerto Rico, people in LA, they've been able to connect with it as well.
Now, Idle No More's next big day, if you will, is Friday, with events planned across Canada and in spots around the world. And if the turnout is what they suggest it will be and hope it will be, then it's possible that this might just be the beginning of something.
I wanted to find another example of community resilience through social media use. And in my research, I found a reading by Kiermaier and Company, and their assertion that the three components of resiliency are having access to social capital, sharing stories, and networking. And I wanted to find examples of these three aspects on Twitter. So first, I really want to focus in on the idea of building social capital, in that community resilience could result from remote First Nation community members using the internet and Twitter sites for communication and cultural preservation. One dimension of community resilience for First Nations is connection to the land, including participating in land-based activities and eating traditional food. If community members discuss these activities on social media networks like Twitter, the information exchange could strengthen cultural preservation and community resilience. So here we see hashtag Bannock Challenge and different people sharing their Bannock recipes as part of this challenge. So building on the idea that social media can aid the community resilience by building social capital between communities, I bring the attention of Veenhoff and colleagues as they present a compelling argument as to why being online fosters greater social capital, particularly in Canada with long cold winters, encouraging Canadians to stay home and watch TV, listen to the radio, and read and consume media anyway. The advent of social media breeds a more active communication and information-seeking activities compared to more passive traditional forms of entertainment such as television. The second aspect of defining Twitter's role in social media facilitating Indigenous cultural preservation is the idea that social media tools like Twitter can support language revitalization. One feature of the Twitter platform is that it is language agnostic, which means that languages can be sent in any language scripted in the Unicode standard. This means that there's nothing to stop someone broadcasting messages using any language they choose. Sources suggest that only 34% of tweets are in English. Here's an example of IndigenousTweets.com, which collates groups and provides summary statistics for tweets of selected languages. So the question is, although the capability exists, is social networking being used by Indigenous language communities? So here you're looking at an example of a Twitter profile for the Anishinaabe language, where a learner of the Ojibwe language in southern Ontario posts daily words in the language in order for his followers to learn. I did a similar search for the Inuktitut language from Nunavut, and a different user created an account to make a word of the day post in order to teach the Inuktitut language to their followers. And what's interesting about this page is that the actual writing for the language is available on Twitter. So here are some very good examples of language preservation on Twitter. So the third and final idea I would like to present of how Twitter helps in facilitating Indigenous cultural preservation, identity, and education is that it helps educate those in a connected network. And in my research through Twitter and in this connected network, I was able to find Duncan McHugh and his connection to the Indian horse movie, which led to different challenges on Twitter. And Duncan McHugh, who's a CBC reporter, has this to offer as his own personal challenge.
Unfortunately, in the history of Canadian media, too many news stories about Indigenous peoples have tended to reinforce stereotypes. They focused on bleak statistics or negative portrayals. But fortunately, things are starting to change. Indigenous peoples are starting to become media makers, and more we're becoming part of the mainstream media itself. We're journalists and film. So for this challenge, I'm asking you to examine and diversify your news sources. Where are you getting your news from? Whose voices and perspectives are you missing? I'm challenging you to check out this list of Indigenous media makers and news organizations that we're providing you, and then follow them wherever they may be posting. And then I want you to read 5 articles from people that post on that list, and then share 2 of them with your friends. That's it. Super easy. Jimmy Gwitch, thanks for taking the challenge.
So because of this connected network, I, as well as the 13,000 followers of Duncan McHugh, are able to at least see this challenge and be exposed to this network of Indigenous news reporters and seek out the truth of what's being reported in traditional media. And so this is definitely one of the most important pillars of how Twitter has an impact on the development and preservation of Indigenous cultural identity. So to conclude this project and answer the question of what exactly is the role of social media, namely Twitter, in the preservation and education of Indigenous cultures, I like to go back to the line from Howe's reading that I mentioned earlier, in that the purpose of the user determines whether it is a constructive or destructive force. If the user is using social media as a replacement for traditional local knowledge and foregoing face-to-face interactions within a community, then it really feeds into Western ideals of individualism, and then it's a destructive force. But if Twitter is being used by a user to help build social capital, aid community resilience, help with language revitalization, and educate those in a connected network, all the while working hand in hand and promoting face-to-face learning of traditional knowledge, then it can be a constructive force. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed making this.